beautiful people. I hope that you are doing well. We do a disservice to those around us and even to ourselves when we fall into a dark pit of despair, or you take a black pill, so to speak. And a lot of times I know I personally feel that way when I look at one thing after another, and then I wake up and I see the World Economic Forum saying another thing and everything just unfolding before our eyes. But then something comes along and helps spark the imagination, renews the courage, and says we must persevere. So before we begin, I want to play for you a quick clip from this book by Malcolm Gladwell titled David and Goliath. And then I want to just talk briefly about it. So let's go now to that audio clip.
We feel obliged to tell you that there are among us a certain number of Jews. 1. When France fell in June of 1940, the German army allowed the French to set up a government in the southern city of Vichy. It was headed by the French World War I hero, Marshal Philippe Pétain, who was granted the full powers of a dictator. Pétain cooperated actively with the Germans. He stripped Jews of their rights. He pushed them out of professions. Revoking laws against anti-Semitism, he rounded up French Jews and put them into internment camps, and took a dozen other authoritarian steps, large and small, including the requirement that every morning French school children honor the French flag with a full fascist salute, right arm outstretched, palm down. On the scale of the adjustments necessary under German occupation, saluting the flag each morning was a small matter. Most people complied, but not those living in the town of Le Chambon-sur-Lignon. Le Chambon is one of a dozen villages on the Vivarais Plateau, a mountainous region not far from the Italian and Swiss borders in south-central France. The winters are snowy and harsh. The area is remote, and the closest large towns are well down the mountain, miles away. The region is heavily agricultural, with farms tucked away in and around piney woods. For several centuries, Le Chambon had been home to a variety of dissident Protestant sects, chief among them the Huguenots. The local Huguenot pastor was a man named André Trocmé. He was a pacifist. On the Sunday after France fell to the Germans, Trocmé preached a sermon at the Protestant temple of Le Chambon. Loving, forgiving, and doing good to our adversaries is our duty, he said. Yet we must do this without giving up and without being cowardly. We shall resist whenever our adversaries demand of us obedience contrary to the orders of the gospel. We shall do so without fear, but also without pride and without hate. Giving the straight-armed fascist salute to the Vichy regime was, to Trocmé's mind, a very good example of obedience contrary to the orders of the gospel. He and his co-pastor, Edouard Théy, had started a school in Le Chambon several years earlier called the Collège Sévenol. They decided that there would be no flagpole and no fascist salutes at Sévenol. Vichy's next step was to require all French teachers to sign loyalty oaths to the state. Trocmé, Théy, and the entire staff of Sévenol refused. Pétain asked for a portrait of himself to be placed in every French school. Trocmé and Théy rolled their eyes. On the one-year anniversary of the Vichy regime, Pétain ordered towns across the country to ring their church bells at noon on August 1st. Trocmé told the church custodian, a woman named Amélie, not to bother. Two summer residents of the town came and complained. The bell does not belong to the marshal, but to God, Amélie told them flatly. It is rung for God, otherwise it is not rung. Throughout the winter and spring of 1940, conditions for Jews across Europe grew progressively worse. A woman appeared at the Trocmé's door. She was terrified and trembling from the cold. She was Jewish, she said. Her life was in danger. She had heard Le Chambon was a welcoming place. And I said, "Come in," André Trocmé's wife Magda remembered years later. And so it started. Soon more and more Jewish refugees began showing up in Le Chambon. Trocme took the train to Marseille to meet with a Quaker named Burns Chalmers. The Quakers provided humanitarian aid for the internment centers that had been set up in southern France. The camps were appalling places, overrun with rats, lice, and disease. At one camp alone, 1,100 Jews died between 1940 and 1944. Many of those who survived were eventually shipped east and murdered in Nazi concentration camps. The Quakers could get people, especially children, out of the camps, but they had nowhere to send them. Trocme volunteered Le Chambon. The trickle of Jews coming up the mountain suddenly became a flood. In the summer of 1942, Georges Lemarand, the Vichy minister in charge of youth affairs, paid a state visit to Le Chambon. Pétain wanted him to set up youth camps around France, patterned after the Hitler youth camps in Germany. Lemarand swept up the mountain with his entourage, resplendent in his marine blue uniform. His agenda called for a banquet, then a march to the town stadium for a meeting with the local youth, then a formal reception. But the banquet did not go well. The food was barely adequate. Trocme's daughter accidentally spilled soup down the back of Lemarand's uniform. During the parade, the streets were deserted. At the stadium, nothing was arranged. The children milled around, jostling and gawking. At the reception, a townsperson got up and read from the New Testament book of Romans, chapter 13, verse 8. Owe no one anything except to love one another, for he who loves his neighbor has fulfilled the law. Then a group of students walked up to Lemarand and in front of the entire town presented him with a letter. It had been drafted with Trocme's help. Earlier that summer, the Vichy police had rounded up 12,000 Jews in Paris at the request of the Nazis. Those arrested were held in horrendous conditions at the Velodrome d'Hiver south of Paris before being sent to the concentration camp at Auschwitz. Le Chambon, the children made clear, wanted no part in any of this. Mr. Minister, the letter began, we have learned of the frightening scenes which took place 3 weeks ago in Paris, where the French police, on orders of the occupying power, arrested in their homes all the Jewish families in Paris to hold them in the Val d'Hiv. The fathers were torn from their families and sent to Germany, the children torn from their mothers, who underwent the same fate as their husbands. We are afraid that the measures of deportation of the Jews will soon be applied in the southern zone. We feel obliged to tell you that there are among us a certain number of Jews, but we make no distinction between Jews and non-Jews. It is contrary to the gospel teaching. If our comrades, whose only fault is to be born in another religion, received the order to let themselves be deported, or even examined, they would disobey the order received, and we would try to hide them as best we could. We have Jews. You're not getting them.
Quote, we have Jews and you're not getting them. That book was so powerful to me. There are portions, chapters in it that I don't necessarily agree with, but the message behind it is so important. So I want to give to you just a quick summary of what Malcolm's goals were going forward in writing the book, and then I would encourage you guys to go out and either read it or even listen to it. And if you don't have money for Audible, then just go find a code for a free month trial, and I would highly recommend reading it, because that's what we're up against right now. We are facing off with giants, and that doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to win. And he gives historically accurate information all throughout the book. So this is what he said. This is what Malcolm writes about the book, and I agree that he does an extraordinary job giving light to these amazing people. Quote, this is a book about what happens when ordinary people confront giants. By giants, I mean by powerful opponents of all kinds. From armies and mighty warriors to disability, to misfortune and oppression. This is about people who have faced an outside challenge and been forced to respond. Should I play by the rules or follow my own instincts? Should I persevere or should I give up? Should I strike back or forgive? Through these stories, I, as in him, want to explore these two ideas. The first is that much of what we consider as valuable in our world arises out of these kinds of lopsided conflicts, because the act of facing overwhelming odds produces greatness and beauty. And second, that we consistently get these kinds of conflicts wrong. We misread them. We misinterpret them. Giants are not what we think they are. The same qualities that appear to give them strength are often the sources of great weakness, and the fact that being an underdog can change people in ways that we often fail to appreciate. It can open doors and create opportunities and educate and enlighten and make possible what might otherwise seem unthinkable. There is so much room for hope when you read this book and really understand what it's saying. And I think we do have a unique opportunity here. I never once thought to look at the enemy's so-called strengths to see how those strengths could actually be exploited. So it's definitely worth a read. I'm going to start looking at some of these enemies that are attempting to bring about this new normal, this build back better crap, and see how we can use that against them. And by the way, the Germans never came and took the Jews in that town. That story alone is worth reading the book. But there were a lot of other great things about military actions, about a basketball team. Unbelievable message of hope. And we really need to share these things with each other when we find something that inspires us to keep going. Because we must keep going, because we are the hope for future generations. Okay, thank you for joining me. Please, as always, like, share, comment, and subscribe. I hope that everybody is having a lovely day. And please stay well in this sick society. Bye, guys.